Hello and welcome to this second video in the health and disease topic, where we're going to be talking about non-communicable diseases. In particular, we're going to be talking about what they are. We're going to be talking about how diet is involved in malnutrition and what malnutrition is. And we're also going to talk about why alcohol causes problems for individuals, but also for society. So as part of this video, I'm going to be using a number of images from Wikipedia. I've left the links for the various Wikipedia pages in the descriptions below, just in case you want to look in more detail about some of the conditions that I only briefly touch on the surface upon. So let's get down to business and talk about non-communicable diseases. Now, in general, non-communicable diseases can be split into two main sections. Okay, the first is genetic. The second sort of string of non-communicable diseases are ones caused by malnutrition. Ooh. Okay, now malnutrition is basically poor diet. Okay, so these two things have something in common. And what that is that if you have a genetic disease or you have a disease caused by malnutrition, you cannot go and give that to another person. So if you were carrying a genetic disease, you can't just go and meet your friend in the park and give them that genetic disease. The same thing, if you're carrying a disease caused by malnutrition, you cannot walk up to somebody else and give them that disease. They are non-communicable diseases. So let's talk about them in a little bit more detail and just talk about some examples. So first off, genetic diseases. Genetic diseases are caused by faulty genes. Now, these faulty genes are inherited. So a parent could, both parents could carry a recessive allele for a faulty gene, and that is passed on to their offspring. You could also have a dominant allele, which is passed on to the offspring. But in any case, you end up with this disease being transferred from parents to child. A couple of examples of this are cystic fibrosis. So cystic fibrosis is simply sort of a disease that causes an overproduction of mucus in the lungs, and not actually all mucal membranes tend to produce too much mucus in individuals who have cystic fibrosis, and they really struggle to shift that mucus. So basically, their lungs are always full of mucus, and they have to have physio to remove that mucus from them. It makes them really susceptible to certain respiratory illnesses, and it can lead to a shorter lifespan. Another example is something called sickle cell anemia. And sickle cell anemia is where blood cells have a faulty gene in them that causes them to become like a sickle shape. So usually blood cells are shaped like a donut, like this, and they're sort of circular. Whereas sickle cell blood cells have this kind of shape. They're deformed. Okay. Now, what it means they can't carry as much oxygen. And because they can't carry as much oxygen, it means that those individuals get tired much, much more easily. Okay, so those are our genetic diseases. What about diseases caused by malnutrition? So what is malnutrition? Well, malnutrition is when you get too much or too little of a specific nutrient. Hence why malnutrition is sort of associated with a poor diet. Okay, malnutrition is sometimes believed to just be when you don't get enough of a certain nutrient, but actually malnutrition can be when you have too much of a certain nutrition. So when you get too little of a nutrient, a specific nutrient, they are known as deficiency diseases. Now, there are loads and loads of deficiency diseases that we could talk about, but I'm just going to focus in on the ones that are expected to you. I'm just going to focus in on the ones that you're expected to know by the exam board. So, the different nutrients that we're going to talk about, or lack of nutrients we're going to talk about, is protein, vitamin C, vitamin D, or also calcium for this one. And last but by no means least, iron. So we're going to talk about the deficiency diseases for these 4 nutrients. What are the deficiency diseases for these 4 different nutrients? Okay, well, 5 for this one. So protein. Now, protein is an interesting one to say, okay? So I'm going to write it out first. Here we go. That's what it is. See if you can say it. Okay, it's kwashiorkor. Even I get it wrong first time round. Okay, it's kwashiorkor. Okay, now kwashiorkor is a disease that causes certain symptoms that you may be familiar with in photos that you've seen of African children. Now, here is an image of an African child from about the 1960s. Now, what you can see is some of the major symptoms of the lack of protein. Now, what these are is we've got an enlarged belly, we've got deficient muscles, and we've also got not enough sort of protein for them to actually develop properly as well. This is sadly quite a common issue in people that do not get enough protein in their diet. So what things give you protein? Well, you've got meat, you've got fishes, you've got dairy, you've got eggs, and you've also got pulses, okay, which are things like lentils. So those are the kind of things that you need to eat in order to prevent this disease. Okay, on to the second one. The second one that we've got vitamin C. Now, vitamin C is all to do with scurvy. Okay. Now, scurvy was a major problem for sailors because they were out on sea for long periods of time and they didn't have access to many foods that gave them vitamin C. And it ended up with them getting scurvy. Now, scurvy causes cells to be unable to link with one another. So all of your cells have the ability to line up with one another and sort of link with one another. Vitamin C is really important in that process. Now, if you don't have enough vitamin C, essentially your cells can't hold themselves together. So what you end up with is things like scurvy mouth, which is here. Okay, it's not a pretty picture. Okay, it's where you get swellings and bleeding gums. But what you can also get is you get muscle pains and you get joint pains as well. Now, one of the main sort of sources of vitamin C is citrus fruits. So the sailors would used to take oranges with them and lemons with them to make sure they were getting enough vitamin C to prevent them getting scurvy. Other things that can give you vitamin C are some vegetables as well. Okay, on to the next one. So we've got vitamin D and calcium. Now, vitamin D and calcium is all to do with bones. Now, I'm just going to put bones here. Now, that's not the name of the disease, okay? But the reason I'm writing bones is because there's sort of different names for the two conditions depending on whether it's in a child or whether it's in an adult. If that's in a child, okay, the condition is called rickets. If it's in an adult, okay, it's called osteomalacia. Now, those two conditions, okay, have very similar symptoms, okay. What they are is they're soft bones, especially in the legs, okay, and in rickets you can also end up with curved bones. So here is a picture of rickets, okay, and as you can see here, this is an image that shows those bent bones. Now, rickets is a child developmental disease, okay, so it's a deficiency disease in children. Whereas osteomalacia, which you may have heard of as like osteoporosis, is where you get weak bones in adults. So essentially it means that adult bones can break really, really easily, which is not very good. It's quite common the older you get, the more likely you are to maybe get something like osteoporosis. So where can you get more vitamin D and calcium in your diet? Well, vitamin D is a really interesting one because vitamin D you can get from oily fish, but you can also get it from going outside. Go outside into the sun and your body will produce more vitamin D. So it's important to get outside is the moral of that story. The second thing, calcium. Where do you get calcium from? Well, you get it from dairy products. Is the sort of the main source of our calcium within our diets. Okay, on to the last one. So on to iron. Now, the deficiency disease for iron is called anemia. Now, just be really careful with the spelling here, okay, because it's got an extra A in it. Okay, now, what is anemia? Well, anemia is essentially a lack of iron in the blood. Now, when you have a lack of iron in the blood, what it means is the blood can't sort of be created properly. Iron is a really important element in hemoglobin, which is the protein in blood that carries oxygen and carbon dioxide around the body. If you don't have enough iron in your diet, you essentially will not produce enough red blood cells, and your red blood cells will be slightly smaller. Now, what that means, it means that your body cannot adequately carry oxygen and carbon dioxide around the body. Now, what that means is it means you get tired really, really quickly. So something like walking up a hill could make you pass out from exhaustion. So it can be a really dangerous disease. Okay, so you need to make sure you get enough iron in your diet. So how do you get enough iron in your diet? Well, you need to eat things like red meats. You need to eat things that have dark green leafy vegetables, such as broccoli, as an example. So those are all the deficiency diseases that you need to know. There are loads and loads of other deficiency diseases as well, okay, but these are the main ones that you need to know. So let's get on to that last topic of alcohol. So let's talk about this last topic of alcohol. So where does alcohol fit into non-communicable diseases? Well, some diseases are caused by our life choices. That could be related to how much exercise we take, but also whether we choose to put drugs into our bodies or not. Now, drugs are chemicals that alter the body in some way. Now, alcohol contains one such chemical. Okay, that chemical is called ethanol. Now, ethanol is broken down by the liver. So, in small amounts, your body can kind of cope with it because your body treats it like a toxin. It goes to your liver, and your liver breaks it down. However, if your liver is exposed to relative amounts of ethanol for long periods of time, it can cause liver disease, okay, damage to the liver, including a condition called cirrhosis, of which here is a picture. Now, cirrhosis is essentially the swelling of the liver. There we go, that's how we spell cirrhosis. So you can see that the liver here is sort of shown to be yellow and pale, okay, and it also gets quite hard, and it causes significant swelling in the patient. What about the wider implications of alcohol to society? So we talked about the individual, but what about society? Well, in the UK, liver disease is the 5th biggest killer. 5th biggest. So that's quite significant. Now, if you take that into consideration, these individuals who have liver disease have to go into hospital, they have to be treated, maybe even saved. Now, that all costs money. How much money does that cost? Well, that costs about £500 million a year. £500 million a year. Now, okay, well, that's just one thing. Liver disease is related to alcohol. But this is the really staggering bit. In the last 30 years, the number of alcohol-related deaths and diseases have increased 450%. That is quite a staggering amount. It's huge. So in just 30 years, 450% more people are dying from alcohol-related diseases. So this is where it comes into society and actually thinking about the moderation of use of alcohol within our societies, thinking about how we can educate people on the dangers of alcohol. Now, yes, there are also scientific studies that show that certain types of alcohol have beneficial properties. Red wine is one such example. If it's had in a very specific amount, it can have more benefits that outweigh the risks. Okay, but with all of these things, anything that you put into your body, there is always going to be some benefit in some ways, or may well not be a benefit, but there will be risks as well. Okay, so what we've talked about in this lesson is we've talked about non-communicable diseases, we've talked about what they are, we've talked about the fact that there are sort of two main types. There's genetic and there are ones caused by malnutrition, malnutrition being too little or too much of a certain type of nutrient, and we've talked about some examples of deficiency diseases. We've also then gone on to talk about the specific example of alcohol, how alcohol is a drug, what a drug is, and how it affects the individual, but also the wider implications of alcohol-related diseases on society. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, hit the like button below. If you haven't yet already, please subscribe to the channel. It's awesome to have your support. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.